reverse racism has become very, very problematic in the world today. I'm nothing but scared. I'm scared when I see things like parades for different races. I get scared when I see people, quote, take pride and have this sort of jingoistic relationship to their race, which they had no control over. They've done nothing for. It is an arbitrary distinction which is scientifically invalid. You know, you can have a Puerto Rican Day parade, you can have Black Awareness Month. Well, where's the white person day? That would seem kind of weird, wouldn't it, considering the white person has been the most objectionable individual in the history of time. I'm a big Martin Luther King fan, and I have some things I'd like to read real fast regarding how to interact with people that are highly objectionable to you. But before I begin, just please try to recognize that you don't need to waste time with a lot of the people out there that are yelling at the top of their lungs for their own self-preservation, their own fears. In fact, most of the time it just makes it worse. I know this firsthand from my experience. I was very naive when I came into all of this myself, and I tried to think, oh, well, people are rational, and you can just explain ideas to people, and they'll listen to you, and they'll respond with, rational objections taking into account the data that you've provided. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. I am all for people taking apart the ideas we talk about. I deeply believe in progressive, forward thinking, and I want to be proven wrong. I want to, but I'm also not going to waste my time with people that have an ego to protect. And you have to play this sort of analysis game when you interact with people. Now let's assume for a moment, and this brings me to Dr. Martin Luther King, let's assume for a moment that you engage somebody in all honesty, and they turn on you like a vicious dog, and they call you names. Suddenly you're a cult member, or you're a communist, or you're just an idiot, or whatever. Now what do? Do you turn right around and call them names? Do you get involved in the warfare? Do you perpetuate those ideas? I'm guilty of this, and I think many of us are, especially those that have been raised in this sort of male dominance, ego nonsense. Remember, we're all victims of culture. And while we all have the cultural tendency to dismiss people through name-calling, in fact, I think I even engaged in that earlier in this broadcast with reference to the person who wrote, accused me of being an anti-Semite. So there's a defensive attribute that does come into play that we've all been groomed into, and we all have to learn how to control that on many different levels. What we're really dealing with is violence. Now, there's an old saying, do as I say, not as I do. I actually had a mentor in a particular field that told me that. And his point is that, we all kind of fall victim to certain patterns of behavior, but we all know better as well. And I want to kind of just go through something that's been very influential on me and that I continually have to work on. And I think also many of you out there have to work on as well. And that is the notion of violence and the engagement of violence from a verbal assault standpoint. Violence is not just, a physical phenomenon. If you read Dr. James Gilligan, he feels that violence is much more powerful in the emotional state. It's an inflicted form of violence for people to be very harsh on others, to inflict projections of suffering, to demean them and shame them and harass them. That's a very, very profound form of violence which seeks exactly what it often gets, which is a violent reaction, which is the other person getting very vehement and aggressive as well. And then you end up with this cycle, and it takes on a life of its own. And suddenly the information doesn't matter anymore. It's just this emotional dispute. It's a very, 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 very sad state of baggage, as I would call it, from an evolutionary standpoint. Anyway, I would like to read from Nonviolence and Racial Justice, an article that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in Christian Century in the late 1950s. And a subsection of this is called Alternative to Violence. And this is relatively short, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. And what he's doing here is explaining what nonviolence is about, and he makes some very relevant comments to the way we should be interacting with our detractors at this stage, especially the really aggressive ones. Quote, "The alternative to violence is nonviolent resistance. This method was made famous in our generation by Mohandas K. Gandhi, who used it to free India from the domination of the British Empire. 5 points can be made concerning nonviolence as a method in bringing about better racial conditions. First, this is not a method for cowards. It does resist. The nonviolent resistor is just as strongly opposed to the evil against which he protests as is the person who uses violence. His method is passive or non-aggressive in the sense that he is not physically aggressive toward his opponent, but his mind and emotions are always active, constantly seeking to persuade the opponent that he is mistaken. This method is passively physical but strongly active spiritually. It is non-aggressive physically but dynamically aggressive spiritually. A second point is that nonviolent resistance does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding. The nonviolent resistor must often express his protest through non-cooperation or boycotts, but he realizes that non-cooperation and boycotts are not ends themselves. They are merely means to awaken a sense of moral shame in the opponent. The end is redemption and reconciliation. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. A third characteristic of this method is that the attack is directed against forces of evil rather than against persons who are caught in those forces. Those of us who struggle against racial injustice must come to see that the basic tension is not between races. As I like to say to the people in Montgomery, Alabama, the tension in this city is not between white people and Negro people. The tension is at bottom between justice and injustice, between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. If there is a victory, it will be a victory not merely for 50,000 Negroes, but a victory for justice and the forces of light. We are out to defeat injustice and not white persons who may happen to be unjust. A fourth point that must be brought out concerning nonviolent resistance is that it avoids not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of the spirit. At the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. In struggling for human dignity, the oppressed people of the world must not allow themselves to become bitter or indulge in hate campaigns. To retaliate with hate and bitterness would do nothing but intensify the hate in the world. Along the way of life, someone must have sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate. This can be done only by projecting the ethics of love to the center of our lives. Now, I want to, that was the end of that subsection. I want to go back through this really fast and reinterpret this language as it applies to us. As I stated before, we're engaged in a civil rights issue, is what we're engaged in. What we have is a variation of a racist type of geopolitical, sociological environment that's based on classism now, not racism. It's based on assumptions of value oriented with very arbitrary measures that rewards certain people in certain contexts and deprives other people in other contexts. He uses the language of evil. Now, what does he mean here? Let me find the sentence. The sentence, yes, he states, a third characteristic of this method is that the attack is directed against forces of evil rather than against persons who are caught in those forces. Now, if you understand psychology and you understand conditioning, what he's really saying here is that the old conditioning is the force that's the problem. The cultural indoctrination that's unsustainable is the evil and manifest because it doesn't work. That's the language as I see it. He also uses more biblical references between light and dark, which if you simply read into them correctly, you see what King is actually stating with respect to what works and what doesn't. Light is what's sustainable and creates harmony. Dark is what creates discord and problems and instability. Now, those things pointed out, his overall argument is very, very meaningful and something that I, again, continue to aspire to, and that all of us, I think, should as well. And that is to stop humiliating and berating people. Either avoid them that come at you, or be painfully nice to them. Be so nice that it sickens them. That's the approach that you should take, and that they feel guilty about what they're doing. Now, it doesn't work for many out there that have had heavy indoctrination, but there really is no other alternative to approach. You can get aggressive towards people, but that's not going to do anything. I've been accused of being aggressive towards people, but if you really listen to the way I speak, I'm not actually aggressive towards them. I'm reflecting my own agitation, and that's a little bit different. I very rarely engage in just ad hominem name-calling, only in very dark times do I really go after and debase myself in such things. And I regret it every time I do it. You push me hard enough, I'll tell you to go fuck yourself. And the moment I do that as a knee-jerk reaction, I immediately stop and reflect and say, you know what did that do? What did that really accomplish? And I want everyone out there to take that to heart when you start to engage this growing anti-Zeitgeist Movement phenomenon that's happening, okay? Because it's not going to stop. As I said many, many months ago, we haven't seen anything yet with regard to the projections against the movement. The hate campaigns, we will be called New World Order, anti-Semitic, Marxist, communist, fascist, anything that can create an overlapping, uncomfortable view, which is being used vehemently right now to get people away from the movement, frankly. That's what they're doing. They're trying to create an uncomfortable association through the prima facie label. Just like if you question the government's actions, you're just a conspiracy theorist. Anything that can be imposed on a group to make them uncomfortable, to show an association, is what's happening right now. And all you can do is roll with it, continue to state the facts as you know it, and be kind to those that hate you. One day, people will realize that science is the ultimate recognition of proving ideas and aligning with nature. One day, people will realize that the human family is just that, a family, and that eventually we'll end up in a system where everyone sees each other as family, and they get beyond the borders, jingoisms, racisms, class issueisms. They'll get beyond this because our sustainability is contingent upon the world understanding itself, upon the human species understanding where it came from, how it operates, and the world it lives in. And if we deviate from that path of unification and using physical reference for our decision-making, well, we're doomed. And in the end, it really won't matter as society continues its breakdown. And at the end of the day, when I look back on my life, regardless of what I do, and when many of you look back at your life, and if you are in pursuit of such values and ideas, at least you can say to yourself, well, at least I tried. And I sit back with that basic understanding. At least I fucking tried. And there's plenty of people out there that do nothing, that contribute nothing, that don't think, that vehemently attack those that want to change anything because they're used to their misery. And they'll look back on their lives, and unfortunately they might feel a little less a little less proud of what they've done, especially if our analysis in the movement is correct with respect to what we see coming as the global economic and environmental collapse continues. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., again, it's not how long you live, it's how well you live. And would you rather live with dignity, or would you rather live on your knees in utter submission to a system that doesn't give a shit about you?